to share their practices, to learn from each other, to have a safe environment to bring up new ideas and to open the discussion to any opinion and ideas that they do, like during their practices or the day-to-day work. So a brief introduction to the team. So as a co-organizer, there is me, Lou, Rosella, then Carmen and Jason. And then we have our fantastic Anna, who is a volunteer, and she looks after the social media platform, which you can find here. So Twitter, actually, if you want to tweet tonight, hashtag DTLDN is our tweet. And then you can see some things happening in our Instagram and in our lately kind of new formally group in LinkedIn. So as I said, second virtual meetup during this pandemic. Normally we do run events in central London face-to-face. You see here some of pictures and some of our events. We normally have, well, we have a variety of events really. So we normally have talks or panel discussions. We can run some workshops. We normally do these in an environment where we feel our host share with us the same mindset and the same kind of way of working and beliefs. So we just hope to be able to run face-to-face meetings and meetups very soon. We will have a few coming, which are actually still online, but who knows, whenever we can, we will just open up again our face-to-face one. So we are sponsored by Zebra People. So Zebra People are a very dynamic recruitment agency. They help us putting together events when we are face-to-face. Obviously, they are happy to sponsor us for food and drinks. And right now, they just help us running the meetup and what we need to keep things together. So thank you, a very big thank you to Zebra People. If you are looking for a new position to fill, just get in touch with them and hopefully they will help you with your career move. So a couple of next events coming up. So in 2 weeks, we will have a quite current event, so surviving lockdown and beyond. So we will have two speakers. They will talk about the learnings about remote working and how the digital nomads do their remote working. And Liz Citron will give some tips and we'll talk about how to build resilience in challenging times, actually, as the times we are going through now. So very relevant. Then we will have the next one on Monday, 10th of August. So it will be about finding a common ground between design thinking and service design. So we will have Mark Montaigne, a Master of Service Design, on a open question night. So we will start collecting questions through our social media, our platforms. It will be kind of an open question. So we want to run it as a chat really and a discussion. So please, if you want to participate, just feel free to send us some questions and then come online on the Monday, 10th of August, and Mark will just answer the question that you ask and you collect. So coming to tonight, we have an exciting evening, exciting talk about user-centric platform engineering. Julie and Nicki from OpenCredo will give us a very nice talk. We'll open up questions just afterwards. So a little bit of an agenda. I'm doing the introduction, then will be a talk, and then a 15 minutes Q&A, and then a little wrap up. So slightly, just very quickly, like a etiquette for the evening. So add your name to the Zoom avatar so we can know who you are, and whenever you post the questions, we will actually give you a name. Please mute yourself during the presentation, and if and when you want to ask questions after the presentation, just unmute yourself. And then last one, just please post your questions in the chat in Zoom. If you want to specify who you are asking the question to, is really good. Otherwise, an open question is always welcome. And yeah, I'll just pass the word to Julie and Nicki, and enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much, Lou. And while Nicki is just sharing her screen, I will just say that we are very excited to be doing this presentation, and we look forward to hopefully also have a discussion with you on this topic after the presentation. So over and over again, we have seen the importance of involving the users early on, and to make sure that we fully understand their needs and the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve. But again and again, we have also seen how this is being left out, how we too quickly jump to conclusions and to a solution based on assumptions and based on a very narrow and off default perspective on what we need to solve. So today we're going to zoom in on a certain kind of user experience in a certain context, namely the user experience of developers working on and with digital platforms. And the reason why we have chosen this focus is that we believe there's an untapped potential when it comes to delivering frictionless experiences for the internal users in your organizations, and more specifically, the ones responsible for developing and supporting the customer-facing services built on these platforms. So we will set the scene with a short introduction on why we need a more user-centered approach, which naturally brings us to the definition of what we mean when we say a user-centered approach. Then we'll dive into what we mean by platform engineering and how it's different from other areas. And then we'll be elaborating on some of our practical learnings on the value and benefits you achieve when you apply a more user-centered approach. And finally, we will have time for some Q&A and perhaps some debate and discussion. Please use the chat, as Lou said, to type in all your questions and the topics that you would like to discuss after our presentation. So my name is Julie Borg-Nellegard, and I've been facilitating design thinking workshops and innovation processes across a broad variety of industries and challenges. And my experience is that clients are genuinely blown away with what they are able to walk away with and the business impact from these intense customer discovery processes. I hope that we will see much more of this within the more technical projects in the future as well, and that we can help change the perception that design thinking and user research, user involvement is mainly for product design or user interface projects.
Great. So my name is Nicki Watt, and I'm the CTO here at OpenCredo. So at OpenCredo, we're a hands-on software development consultancy that helps clients to adapt and adopt emerging technologies to solve their business problems. And one of the areas that we do a fair amount of work in is in platform engineering. So my background is very much technical. So I've been involved in the application development side, the infrastructure side, DevOps, a whole range of stuff. And my role at OpenCredo is really to kind of look at bringing all these things together. And as I said, many of our projects are platform-based, where we try to help clients either right from the beginning build platforms or actually improve them sort of going along. And that's really what we want to try and look at bringing together, is both these technical worlds and the design thinking world as part of that.
Yeah, so what we have realized is that in the push to adopt these new, cool, innovative technology platforms, as an industry, we have lost sight of the human innovators that are actually needing to use them. And as a consultancy, we have landed up working with a fair number of different platforms, as Nicki just said. Unfortunately, many of them have landed up being quite clunky, a lot harder to use than one would have hoped. So they haven't really delivered the value that business was expecting. And we believe a large part of this is due to the fact that there is an unhealthy focus on just the new cool technology in itself, and not so much on the broader human or developer experience involved in using the platform. And this is why we would like to highlight the need of a different way, and we believe part of the answer is a more user-centric way. We would also like to highlight that we are not the only ones talking in favor of this. So this is a page literally taken from the State of DevOps 2019 report, which supports the message that a more user-centered or human-centered approach is necessary, and a better consideration of the internal user experience of technology platforms is needed. So this particular part of the report stresses that when it comes to building complex systems and managing business-critical infrastructure, human-centered tools and processes are even more important, because the work in itself is actually very complicated, and it deserves the same level of attention, if not more, than consumer-facing systems. So now we've tried to provide some points on why we believe we need a different approach, a more user-centered one. So let's jump into what we mean by that. We believe that one of the best methodologies for working effectively with users, both the internal and the external ones, is design thinking. And design thinking helps us change how we go about exploring problems and creating solutions to those problems. So there isn't really one single or universal definition of design thinking, but we genuinely like to refer to Tim Brown, the chairman of IDEO, who's been a huge part of coining and conceptualizing design thinking together with the founders of IDEO. And as the quote here states, design thinking specifically offers a human-centered approach, integrating both the needs of the people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for achieving business success. So design thinking really is a philosophy, and it's a series of mindsets. It's a toolbox to help you solve challenges creatively with the humans at the very core. So it should be rather obvious that design thinking builds on an outside-in perspective, with the users always at the center of attention. But we see an increasing appreciation of this when it comes to the consumer-facing products. But it seems that we have, to a large extent at least, neglected the importance of the outside-in perspective when developing for our internal employees. So in this context, it's not so much about looking outside the organization, but rather looking outside the executive management room to engage with those employees, these developers that we're designing for. So we hope that some of the learnings and considerations that we share today will give you some inspiration on how to implement this in your own context. We're not going to present one structured process, but rather highlight some of the key mindsets within design thinking that we believe or have experienced are specifically relevant in relation to platform engineering. We also don't believe in a one-size-fits-all, but these core principles are to a large extent guiding the way that we work. So the first one here is empathy. And why is it so important to empathize with your users? Well, if we don't know the users that we solve problems for, we will probably solve problems for ourselves, or perhaps imaginative problems that are in fact not real problems. And the best way to build empathy is to spend time with the users, to listen and to observe. And your users will typically be different, and thus it's often not very effective to design for some abstract average user. You'll most likely get more value from talking to them, from talking to your real users and exploring the key tasks that they want to achieve and how they want to achieve them. It's about truly understanding how they get their work done and optimizing their experience while they do that. The second mindset that we would like to highlight today is the ideation and exploration mindset. So this mindset really is a combination of both the divergent and convergent thinking. And the aim of the first, of the divergent thinking, is to expand the amount of possible ways to solve that problem that you have identified through empathizing with your user. And every time that we need to open up to further look into a problem or into a solution or into an opportunity, we need to apply this mindset. And after we have accumulated as many ideas as our team possibly can conceive, it's important to then filter through all these ideas to find the ones best suited for the goal. By always focusing and combining both the divergent and convergent thinking, we get the advantage of casting a wide net of ideas and exploring these ideas with users and with stakeholders before we filter them down to the best solution. The third mindset is prototyping, which is typically part of the iteration cycles you want to be working through. We have seen the power of prototyping many times and the effect of doing it early and quickly to validate and test the solution. So besides building a thorough understanding of your users' needs to make sure that you're solving the right problem, you need to also engage with them while designing and developing the solution to make sure that it's actually well designed and that it's solving the problem well. So prototyping will enable us to test with our users or perhaps stakeholders to learn how well we are solving their problems and what we might need to adjust. And then we go back to the prototype and we adjust it and we test again. And by doing this, we are able to quickly adjust our direction to get closer to the goal of finding the most useful and valuable solution. A final point here is to consider what kind of prototype you need to answer the most important questions in your project or at the stage you are at in your project. And the important dimensions to consider here is resolution and then fidelity. So the resolution of a prototype is determined by how much of the functionality, the final functionality, is represented in the prototype. And the fidelity is determined by how close the prototype resembles the final product. Trying to keep these two dimensions as simple as possible keeps iteration speed high and prevent you from losing many resources by over-investing in time-consuming prototypes too early in your project. So we want to highlight that a prototype can be as simple as a team structure that you have mapped out on a paper or a visualization of a future user journey that you test with your users. Another key message for today is that when we're trying to tackle these challenges in platform engineering, we need to also work on the services around the platform in itself and thus draw from the toolkit of design thinking, service design. The core element in service design is the application of design onto service-oriented challenges. And in the context of platform engineering, this can be about the processes, team structure, governance, or the entire user journey related to the platform, just to mention some. And Nicki will come back to how to design and work with these services around the platform a bit later. But we are here on this slide coining service design in accordance to Nielsen Norman Group's definition, which reads, service design is the activity of planning and organizing a business's resources in order to directly improve the employee's experience and indirectly the customer's experience. And this last bit is another important point in platform engineering. So while it's key to work on the developer experience, these developers are building for some end users, your customers, which you also need to take into account. So you want to have this dual focus when developing your digital platform or working with your digital platform. When bringing design thinking and service design into our projects and being able to clearly show the accelerated value these principles and mindsets offer, we have seen an increased appreciation of user research, prototyping, these divergent and convergent thinking, and the design thinking part of the business in general. And we have ourselves come to the realization that we can make more of a difference, bringing creativity and innovation to a problem rather than technical talent to a solution. And this is why, before jumping into solution space, it's so critical to make sure we fully understand the problem space and the context. And talking about the context, today we're going to focus on the context of the developers and more specifically the user experience of these developers, which we refer to as DX or DevX. We live in a world where organizations and companies, industries are digitalizing their businesses at a faster pace than ever before, where APIs and digital platforms are more important to business success than ever before. A result from this is that the developer experience, which is all about using the UX techniques to make life easier for your developers, is becoming more and more essential to remain competitive in the digital economy. So the point we have made is that we should apply principles of UX to improve the DX or DevX. And as with any application of UX principles, we need to consider the context and the domain in itself, which in this case is platform engineering. So before we move on to some practical learnings and considerations, let's get a better understanding of what we mean by platform engineering.
Great, thanks, Julie. So what we're going to talk about is platform engineering. So it probably makes sense just to sort of define what is it when we talk about platform engineering, what do we mean? So in its simplest form, it can be described as the practice of designing, building, and operating platforms for application development teams to use and leverage. So why has it become so popular? So in general, the march of digitalization and business itself is demanding more and more from IT. So they want faster time to market, better reliability, and the ability to scale. And the old ways of building software just doesn't cut it anymore, and we need new paradigms, new software processes. And the platform or the platform concept really lies at the heart of this. It tends to smash together. You've got infrastructure, operations, application development, all coming together to offer a place where all of the heavy mundane lifting can be done for developers and the operational folk, which would normally have to do this. And it provides a common foundation to free developers up to actually develop more of their product for the end user through economies of scale. So in terms of the sort of scope and focus for a platform, it is very much geared towards internal engineers. So this is what we would call business to employees, which is probably different to, you've often maybe heard of the terms B2C or B2B, and this is very much focused at the internal employee. It's more than just a particular piece of tech, though, that you would package up and kind of give to someone. It spans your infrastructure, your operations, as well as application development. So it spans quite a large area of what you're sort of operating with. And the goal is really to enable engineers and to help them to produce a better end product for your products and your clients to actually consume. So you might ask, well, you know, what is a platform? Is it Amazon or is it Kubernetes? Many people have heard of sort of Kubernetes. And I would argue that it really should be seen as a product and actually treated as a product in order to be successful. So much like other software that's out there, it's produced for a user, in this case, internal ones. But crucially, whilst it is a product, I think it's not just the product and the tech that underpins it. It's also the fact that the platform is supported and interacts with a number of sort of key developer engineering services and processes. And it's really part of a much broader ecosystem, which also needs to be taken into account when you're designing your platform to make sure that it fits within the context that you find yourself. This includes things like your observability practices, release processes, and things like that. So whilst internally, this is seen as an ecosystem of technologies and people and processes, from the business perspective, they generally don't care. They see this more as an IT detail and just a mere sort of stepping stone, which will get them to where they ultimately want to go. And where they ultimately want to go is gaining things like the faster time to market, better reliability, and the ability to scale. So quite often, the business will have been told, probably by a CTO or a CIO, that adopting a platform will help them gain this capability. And they're also quite often told that these platforms can provide things out of the box through techniques like they can auto heal the applications, they can auto scale out, auto roll out, and it will provide many of these functionalities out of the box. And it's really just a case of getting the engineers to construct it, use it properly, and all should be well. So you get your internal budget approved and you begin building your platform for your engineering teams. You've done your research, so you're in the cloud, tick, you've got the scalability covered, you're using Kubernetes, big tech, absolutely everyone along with the rest of the world is using it, so what could go possibly wrong? And you've got a, quote, DevOps team as well to help run it, so you really should be good to go. Unfortunately, we often find that the reality doesn't actually live up to expectations. And the prime reason for this is because we've really forgotten about the users, the developers. And we focused very much on the shiny new technology and the stuff that comes out of conference talks, but we haven't actually focused on the user to help us achieve our goals. So what we're going to do now is have a look at focusing essentially on the user. So, oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. So as Julia noted, empathy and developer empathy is a key part to getting this right. So you do really need to understand and connect with your developers and their needs in order to understand how to build your platform. And the two most powerful things that we see in our consultancy is engaging your engineers directly and also mapping out many of the key platform ecosystem journeys that they find themselves in. So on the first point, in terms of engaging your developers directly, don't rely on proxies. So don't rely on other people to tell you exactly how the platform should be. You've got to actually engage developers who will give you firsthand ideas as to what's working and what is not. But the most important thing is really to be able to empathize with them, and that is to feel their pain. So what you really want to do is map out the key ecosystem journeys and understand what are the skeletons in the closet. Where are the points that it's actually breaking down and the developer experience is reduced. So when developers tend to moan about things and they lament about the horrendous processes and the hoops that they have to jump through, the processes are often quite key at the top. And this often happens because there's pain and there's friction when something breaks down in the flow that they're trying to do. And in today's world, you've got many systems and processes that are being developed in more of a Lego plug and play style. And the platform is no exception. So with your platforms, you've got Amazon, you've got Kubernetes, but then you grab a bit of authentication from this service, a bit of CI/CD from there, and you land up with a whole mishmash of things in your ecosystem toolbox that is growing ever bigger. And as a result, the opportunities for things to actually fall between the cracks also grows bigger with that. So it's really key to map out everything, including these external dependencies in your journey. So the key point that I really just want to make here is that platforms do not exist in isolation. They are very much part of a much bigger ecosystem. And if you're going to develop or design a platform that is going to be fit for purpose for your developers, you have to take the ecosystem into account so that it can fit within the broader context. So what are some of the key platform ecosystem journeys that we see in sort of our day-to-day work with various clients as heavily impacting on the developer experience? So I just mentioned sort of three here, which tend to come up quite often, and that is the sort of onboarding process, troubleshooting, and releasing. So for onboarding, this is really about what is the process that a developer needs to go to get up and running on the platform in the first place. Troubleshooting is around, when it all goes wrong, how do developers actually go about getting feedback, as well as access to dive into and look at the errors and the issues that is impacting their work. And then from a release perspective, how does the team go about actually releasing their products and software to the end users through the platform? So from a onboarding perspective, we've really kind of found that, from an onboarding perspective, we've found that it's really a case of having a look at how long does it actually take to get the developer up and running. And this can often be had a look at by things like the first time to deployment. So this is often something, whoops, sorry, it's going too fast. Oh, sorry, my slides are just a bit stuck here. Oh, sorry, my notes are a little bit stuck. So in the onboarding side of things, it's about getting the developer up and running. In terms of the troubleshooting, it's very much around, how do you get the developers to be able to see the resources and the errors and things that are available on the platform when things go wrong. But the area that I really want to sort of have a look at the moment is on the releases. So I'm really sorry, let me just, I've just got, my laptop is just stuck a little bit here, which just excuse me for 2 seconds. Sorry about this. 2 seconds. Okay, sorry about that. Come on, where is this going?
Let me know, Nicki, if you want me to share my screen.
Yeah, maybe if you can. It's a little bit, I'm having a little bit of trouble here. Do you want, sorry, do you want to just share yours? Sorry about that. Don't know what's going on.
Yeah, let me just make sure I'm in the right place. I am happy to do so.
Right.
Let me see if I can overrule your screen sharing. So I'll try here. Yeah?
Yep. Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. Let's grab that. So let's make sure I'm in the right place. Okay. All right. So.
You happy to go?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to have a look at the releasing side of things. So okay. Okay, so all right, there we go. All right. So in terms of the release process, so often what will happen is that we've had quite a few different sort of clients where they have been involved in they've built their platforms, they've built their systems, and they tend to be coming from a sort of enterprise organization perspective, and they want to build the platforms and make them available for the various developers to work on. So I'm going to bring the experiences from a few different clients and bring them together, and just for sort of brevity's sake. But most of them are running on Amazon and in a Kubernetes cluster. And so the examples I'm going to give are probably going to be related around that. So we've had as I said, we've had a few clients, and the challenges, one of the challenges that kind of sort of came up is the fact that the releases are really sort of too slow. And the platforms are, it's sort of unreliable in terms of when the applications are actually being deployed onto the system. And the assumption that the sort of technical, the assumption that the management has made is that this is actually a technical problem, and that it's really a case of having a look at, can we do something better with Kubernetes, or can we add more automation into the system to be able to allow this to get sort of running forward. But I think next screen, I think it is. Oh, no, sorry, one back. I'm really in the wrong place. Yeah. Yeah, anyway. What we can do is quite often, we don't just dive into the approach sort of straight away in terms of once we get these type of sort of challenges. Or dive straight into the technology. What we'll often do is go through a discovery phase. And this will involve doing a complete sort of release walkthrough with the client in terms of what the release process looks like, and really try and understand what their pain points are. So this involves user mapping, so do sort of value mapping sort of journeys. And it also involves things like interviewing the users and the developers as part of the process. Might also involve sort of pairing with them and observing just in general how the process actually works. So these are some of the sort of key things that we take in terms of the approach that we try to have a look at. What are the things that are really causing pain in the developer's experience? Next one. And what we tend to find is that we get a few different sort of problems coming up. So the first problem that we find is that there can be this sort of concept of a generic one-size-fits-all flow. And what I mean by that is that you find that in some cases the actual process was developed maybe a little bit from afar. So maybe you've had some sort of enterprise architects that have developed a process flow which works for a certain subset of the users because this is the idea that they had in their minds when they kind of put it together, but it doesn't actually apply to all of the teams and the broader teams that are trying to use the system. So a single sort of flow is created, but it's not actually fit for purpose because without talking to the actual users, it was created in an abstract kind of sense. So this is one of the challenges that we tend to see. We also see that there's, sorry, still previous one. Yep, sorry. It's going all over the show. So another thing that we find is that there's often a lack of metrics or capturing of the visibility. So in one case that we had they mentioned that the releases were too slow, but when we actually spoke with the developers, they said, well, actually, we don't think it's too slow, you know, given our circumstances and everything that we find ourselves in. But no one's actually told us how fast should this thing be. And as a result, the developers were not able to get the feedback that they needed from the platform. So they were flying blind. So both the developers as well as management were not able to extract the information that was needed from the platform to be able to understand whether their releases were actually being successful or not. But one of the interesting angles which came out was the fact that the developers felt that actually the platform had only gone halfway. So whilst they were trying to develop an end-to-end sort of product and roll that out, this would involve releasing a few things. So it'll be both the application as well as maybe some supporting services in the cloud. So they might need things like an Amazon RDS instance or something like that. And what they said is that it was easy for the application to be automated, but then as soon as they needed to create these instances in the cloud, the release process broke down and suddenly they had to engage with a human process where there was a new team, there was an infrastructure team that got involved. And from their perspective, there was an inconsistency in their understanding of what the platform was actually supposed to provide as a service and what they were able to do. So from a management perspective, they hadn't necessarily seen this. They had separate teams, but from the developer's experience perspective, they weren't actually able to develop and roll out their whole product because the platform in their minds only went halfway. Next slide. So once you've, once we've kind of gone through this process and we've kind of looked at what all the skeletons are in the sort of closet, what you then want to do is have a look at what are the different ideas that exist out there so that we can have a look at trying to improve this. And next slide. This is where we will kind of use all of our experience in terms of building platforms to group a lot of the challenges that we find in common when we go through these exercises, and then recommend a few possibilities for how this could actually be addressed. So these sort of lightweight recommendations often sketch out different ways to achieve the opportunities for improvements. So they're also then used to engage our stakeholders and clients to discuss the ideas and the options and basically define which ones are going to add best bang for your buck. So some of the examples of the sort of processes that you might want to try and improve on is, how might we go about reducing the friction for delivering new end-to-end services? Or how might we go about improving the insights or the feedback about the health of releases? Next slide. So if we look at one of these sort of processes, so here we've got the opportunity to how do we go about actually improving the reduction of the friction in developing a new end-to-end service. So in the example that I gave before, what we came up with as part of working with the developers and the engineers is a few different things. So there's a combination of both technical things as well as process and potentially even sort of team structures. So a particular example in this case was one of the suggestions was to use something called a Kubernetes operator, which might sound like a little bit of Greek to most people, but for those of you who have worked with Kubernetes before, what this is, it's a mechanism that allows you to write something for the platform that will enable you to programmatically connect and control something in the cloud environment. So if you recall, one of the challenges that the developers had raised is that they didn't have this end-to-end flow as soon as they needed to create something in the cloud. And this is one of the solutions to allow them to remove the sort of manual human effort in there and give them a frictionless end-to-end solution. So that was one of the sort of ideas. The other one was around introducing something called GitOps, which is a different way of actually deploying your applications into your end consumers. And the focus here was to really provide a way which will, again, reduce the manual effort and provide a much more reliable way for the users to push their services into production. So this, in the sort of example of the client that we were at, they had some manual sort of processes where they had to go and get various version numbers about which services were being deployed, and this would basically take that away for them. And the other example that we gave here was also to potentially adapt the team structure. Now, this might sound like a sort of strange thing to sort of throw in here, but it actually potentially could make quite a big difference to the end experience. So in the particular situation that we kind of found ourselves in, the platform itself wasn't actually being managed by any sort of one particular team. It had evolved through sort of a variety of teams kind of looking after it. And as a result, different pieces were being managed by different people. So one of the suggestions here was actually to change the team structure and actually implement a platform team as a means to actually help improve the overall process, so that from a developer experience, they don't have to have such a disjointed sort of flow. Next one. So this kind of naturally leads on to you know, sort of prototyping and doing proof of concepts around some of these things. So and as I said before, this can be done generally as a sort of technology proof of concept, but it doesn't have to be. It can actually also be the fact that you just visualize certain things like the processes or even the team structures that might be able to make this difference. So next one, thanks. So in terms of our release process that we're kind of looking at, one of the sort of practical prototyping that we did in this space, as I said, was to actually build a Kubernetes operator. And that allowed us to actually prototype out the controlling of certain pieces within the Amazon infrastructure, which could then be extrapolated out and used to many more. So that was a sort of technical thing. We actually visualized out the sort of the GitOps workflow and presented that to the teams to help them sort of visualize and understand what the potential flow might look like so that they could get a better workflow. And visualizing workflows and sort of team structures is actually really powerful, because it's a good way to actually convey abstract concepts, which can help you implement your solution in the end. And as I said before, we actually also recommended to create a platform team. Now, I just do want to give a shout out to, it's actually Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace, who have written a book which is called Team Topologies. And this actually goes into a lot of detail about how you can actually structure your teams in a different way, depending on the context of your organization. So one of the sort of patterns in here is the introduction of a platform team, which is one of the recommendations that we kind of put forward for one of our clients. And it kind of speaks to this point around the fact that we're working in an ecosystem and sort of people that are changing, the organization itself is changing. And it allows you to choose and adapt your sort of teams for different circumstances. So I really would I would highly recommend that you actually have a look at this this book to see what the different ways are that you could actually evolve your team structures as you move along, especially with a platform team, to adapt to the developer experience as your organization changes. Next one. So what happens though when a sort of user-centric approach is missing is that things can go a little bit wrong, obviously, and it certainly doesn't work out the way that you expect. So the typical things that will happen in terms of an experience going wrong, next screen please, is that the platform lands up getting treated as a pure product or a technical problem. And when this happens, you basically miss out on all of the key aspects which can actually help to make your platform experience better for your engineers. So things like looking at the mapping of all of the ecosystem and the processes around that will often add more value than just purely looking at Kubernetes or Amazon itself for what it can do for you. Again, if it's missing, you also land up with these very unclear or murky boundaries and lines of responsibility. And this is extremely frustrating for developers because it hampers their ability to make fast progress. And finally, the sort of worst thing, I guess, that can happen is that it can result in a flaky end result or an end experience for your consumer. And this is often when we do kind of get called in when things maybe are going a little bit wrong. But it impacts not only on the developers and the engineers, but also on your business, potentially even your sort of reputation at the end. So finally, if what we'd like to just kind of maybe sort of finish off with is saying that if you do sort of opt to adopt a user-centric approach for looking at your platform engineering, you will tend to land up with a platform that exhibits the following sort of properties and characteristics. So, and this is a typical example of exactly where you do want to sort of land up. So self-service is one of the key things that enables developers to have an autonomous sort of experience, which empowers them to be able to do what they need to do without having to interact with many manual processes and things like that. So building your services through API-driven interactions is often a key wish or on the wish list of many developers. And by actually speaking to them and understanding where their pain points are coming from, this tends to surface as one of a natural result of that. Also, a user-centric approach will help you to establish clear boundaries and lines of responsibility, so that it's very clear to the developer what's in the remit of the platform team versus what's in the remit of the application development team. And without those boundaries, it becomes very difficult for developers to understand their role in terms of what they can do and can't do, and the way that they interact with things. And then you obviously also want and land up getting a flexible and an evolvable platform. So there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all, and many platforms that have been designed this way really don't work. So by spending time with the developers, the different teams that have got different requirements, it provides you with a way of understanding what those are, and then you can actually design your services and the technologies around that, and land up with something that's fit for purpose for what you're trying to do. And finally, you land up with some good, consistent practices. So this is around things like you consistently want to apply sort of security and logging across the platform. And this gives confidence to management because they've actually created, they've paid the money to get this platform in order to get these business benefits. But likewise, it also gives confidence to your engineers that they are actually operating within the acceptable guidelines. And yeah, so it's not just engineers that we need to worry about. It is also, your management, leadership, security, all of these users as well. So I think that's where I'm going to end.
All right. So even though our focus today is very much on the user experience and user desirability, those of you very familiar with design thinking know that it's not the only thing you have to test and validate. To make a successful solution, it also has to be technically feasible and viable for the business. So to justify building the right thing for your users, it also has to make sense for the business and work with available technology. So you really need to, when building your platforms, working with your platforms, you have to bring people into the process that cover all these three different elements, or you will end up making promises to your users that you can't keep. So this is our final note. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to having a little time for some Q&A. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I will hand it over to you, Lou, and hopefully you have some questions that we can answer here in the end.
Yeah,
thank you very much. It was
apologies for the technical difficulties there.
Yeah, I was saying, yeah, it sometimes, you know, I asked before, bear with us, because sometimes it actually happens. We are, you know, all in the same boat. Yeah, sometimes technology is not really from, you know, to our side, but we always find a way to, you know, to go through it. So we do have a few questions in the chat. I just wanted to start with my own question, which is sort of taking into consideration the 5 steps of design thinking. So the empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. In case you have a very tight schedule for finishing or just like giving a product, how are you finding that maybe like the 2 or 3 steps that you really cannot skip? So among the 5, what are the maybe 2 or 3 that you wouldn't really skip?
So if I'm to start out, I will start with a very typical consultant answer, annoying answer, saying it depends, because it depends on the question that you would like to answer, and sometimes it's more about really understanding the users, and then of course you need the empathy, you need the prototyping, you need to test it, and sometimes it's more about really, you have a fairly good understanding of the problem and of your users, but it's more about exploring the different ways that you can actually solve those problems. So it's really about figuring out the stage that you are at and what are the key questions that needs to be answered. Where is the main uncertainty? Where is the largest risk at the moment? So defining those hypotheses and validating those.
And do you do these within the team? Do you do it together? Kind of finding out which are the key steps.
Yes, sometimes the best scenario is when you can do it together. Sometimes it requires you to, for instance, the example that Nicki gave is that sometimes you go into a project where the people in the project team have certain assumptions on what is actually the challenge, and then you need to actually go out and test that, and then you will need to refine the challenge that you're going to work on, and then you in the team have a reassessment of what challenges or main hypotheses you need to validate.
Yeah, I see. Very good. So we do still have 5 minutes. So I hand over to Jason just to ask a quick few questions that were asked during the talk in the Q&A. And guys, if you want to put your video on so that you can, you know, we can see your faces and we can maybe have a bit more conversation, that would be great. If you don't want to, just feel free not to put the video on. So over to you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks, Julie, Nicki. Great talk. I'm actually gonna offer Vikram. Vikram's got a few questions there that he might want to ask. So do you want to you happy to ask your own question, Vikram?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Jason. My name is Vikram and I work at the Open University in Milton Keynes. So I'm also into this area of human-centered computing and design thinking. So thank you for the talk to both the speakers. My question is, first I would like to ask, so design thinking needs a lot of freedom, and doesn't that get restricted within the strict frameworks of corporate environment? So that's my first question.
So, I mean, I think that there's always, yes, in one way that's true, but I think there's always a case of, we don't really see it as a strict process, so we don't see it as you must go through all of the phases of design thinking. We more take it as there are principles that you need to have a look at and apply when you're doing your project. So even within a corporate environment, there are opportunities to be able to do iterative sort of prototyping and things like that. Granted, it's not going to, you know, be as easy as if you're in a startup, but I think there's still opportunities to do that. You know, sometimes you are going to be restricted, and there's only so far that you will be allowed to go in terms of maybe developing something. But quite often what we've found is that in the enterprise sort of organizations, they come from this very strict sort of governance sort of setup, but they're trying to innovate, they're trying to do some of these new sort of projects, and as a result they're realizing they actually need to change. And this is part of what we try to do when we work with them, is to highlight many of these things, including things like the team structures changing and those type of things. So yes, there is restrictions often in an enterprise, but I think there's always opportunities to empathize. It doesn't matter whether you're in a sort of corporate or a startup. That's just a human, I think a human thing of trying to understand where somebody's coming from. Ideating, you can still do that. You might get shot down a few times, but eventually you might get there as well. And I think prototyping and testing is done anyway. It might be done under the covers, but it still ends up getting done because people have got to try things out. So I think the elements do happen, but they just happen more freely and openly in certain circumstances.
Great.
I might ask, sorry, Vikram, I might just ask a question on that, which I had was, when this talk came up, I was very intrigued because it's certainly not an area where you associate design thinking with platform engineering, right? And I wondered where the what sales pitch, where was the convincing, or how did your organization come to embrace this and believe in the value of design thinking, you know?
So I think we've come at it from probably two sides, if I can put it that way. So OpenCredo traditionally is a very sort of technical orientated sort of company, and we've got quite a sort of technical heritage. But we've managed sort of all the way sort of throughout this, we've landed up doing many of the things in design thinking. We just haven't necessarily called it that, if I can put it that way. So with some of, so with like Julia coming on board, who is far more au fait with the actual language of design thinking, we actually realized that actually we seem to be doing a lot of these things. There is an overlap. We just haven't known that it's been called that. So it's not a perfect fit, and that's why we didn't really want to kind of say you go through these exact stages, because we just kind of do what we do, and it happens to align very well with design thinking. So now what we're looking is actually just putting the language a bit better together for the two. I don't know if Julia, you want to say any more on that?
No, I think that was very well put, and I also see that we don't have that much more time, and I know that we would love to answer more questions, and we're also happy to stay and continue the discussion. But I know that Lou and Karen, you would also like to do a wrap up.
So I think what we can do is, for anyone that needs to go, feel free to go. Don't feel bad about it because the event is coming to an end. However, for those of you who want to stay, we can keep going for a few more minutes and as I finish with the questions. if that's okay. And if anyone else have another question, just raise your hand and we will let you ask the question. So I'll hand over to Jason to keep going with this.
Oh, I think Vikram, you had another couple of questions you wanted to ask.
Okay, thank you for the chance again. So my another question is, how do you measure the success of design thinking, and what are the KPIs, let's say?
So we are not necessarily measuring the success of design thinking. We are trying to measure the success of making improvements and achieving the end sort of customer goals. So there are metrics, for example, that we do look at. So in the example of the sort of release process, there are things like the lead delivery time, time to failure fix, those type of things. So those are general metrics that you would look at as part of, are we actually improving the overall sort of reliability of for example, a release process. So as I say, we're coming at this from two angles. There's the technical angle and there's the design thinking angle. So we aren't really thinking, are we successful in the design side of things? We're looking at what are the problems, what are the opportunities, and have we made progress on that, and how do we measure that? So that tends to be how we've done that. Now that might change as we sort of go along. I'm sure Julia's got some ideas as well.
Yeah, if I was just to say one thing, I would say that one of the key things that we can really see an effect on is the adoption, the user adoption. And that's regardless of whether you're working on a product for the end user or for your internal employees, the adoption of what you're making. And the better fit between what you're making and designing and the needs of the users, the higher the adoption is likely to be. So that is definitely something that we typically try to highlight and measure.
Thank you.
Cool. Christina, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to read it out?
I can read it out. I'm just a bit camera shy. My question is whether there are any distinct differences or things we should be mindful of when doing research for DevX versus the standard UX research process, user research process. Is having some technical familiarity with some of the technical terms that they use or basic technical knowledge helpful, or is it better to have a blank slate and have that neutral beginner's mindset and have them tell you how they do things more advantageous because you don't have preconceived notions?
That's a good question. I think I would say personally that actually having technical knowledge is very beneficial to understanding where developers are coming from. So it's one of the things that we can empathize with when we do go into clients, because we are very technical ourselves. So you do understand and can recognize many of those pain points. So specifically for us in a consultancy sort of perspective, having that background is crucial to actually being able to sort of understand what some of the problems are. Having said that, that's not to say that you can't be part of a broader team that goes in and is part of the sort of fact-finding sort of exercise, because I think there's always something to be said of coming from, as you say, a mindset where maybe you haven't come across some of these things, and you'll ask the questions that people just don't ask because they think, oh, that's just too obvious. I won't kind of ask that. So I think having a combination is probably a good thing. But I would say you do generally, as part of this, would need somebody with a technical mindset.
Yeah, so if you are doing an interview or observing or listening to the users, it's simply good to at least combine. So you have one with at least quite a lot of technical experience and knowledge, and then one that probably has less and will ask every and all questions.
Thank you.
Great. Is anyone else got any questions they would like to ask?
There is another one.
Thank you. Would you like to ask your own question? I'm happy to read it out. So, Casper has asked, oh no, yep, you're on mute, Casper. Yeah, still on mute, mate.
Technical gremlins today.
Yeah. Oh, I can read it, no problems. Good to see your face though. So Casper asks, he loves the idea of applying design thinking to platform engineering. Are there particular methods or tools you use to help developers and wider product teams visualize the infrastructure they are or should be working with?
Okay. So we use a variety of things, and it will depend sometimes, but just general workflow tools, even PowerPoints and things are a good way, especially if you're presenting to sort of senior stakeholders. That's a good way of doing things. Having said that, when you're actually designing sort of architecture and stuff, again, it depends what it is that you're doing. So just by way of a sort of example, if you're designing or if you're proposing like an Amazon architecture, there are a few different tools out there that you can use. There's something called Cloudcraft, for example, which makes very pretty three-dimensional sort of versions of your architecture, and it provides a really nice way of kind of visualizing that. So that's a way to do it. And general sort of process flow, sort of toolings out there. Draw.io is another one that we kind of use. But PowerPoint, Keypoint as well is things that we have done.
During the past 3 or 4 months, we have been doing more and more workshops remotely as well, and using tools like Miro and Mural to visualize and brainstorm together, and they also help mitigate that now you can't just draw on a whiteboard and things like that, because I think sometimes it's also just about having a pen, having a whiteboard, or having a paper to start drawing things out. And then of course at a later stage, and if you want to visualize an entire infrastructure or architecture, you want to move to something a bit more advanced, and you want to visualize it or digitize it. Yeah. Thank
you. That's great.
That's great.
Yeah, I think Miro and Zoom have done very well out of lockdown. I know we've been using Miro a lot and breakout rooms, and it's fantastic when you've tried to get about 40 people into a very small meeting room that was the only one left. It's not going back as far as I'm concerned. Actually, there was something you mentioned about visualizing Git ops. Is that a particular thing, or is that just a normal flow that you would visualize, or is that a specific thing within Git?
No, so that was a particular flow. So it's just a normal sort of workflow type tool, because it's also not exactly the same for everybody. It's not like it's not a one size fits all. So depending on how, I'm not sure how much you're aware of what it is, or the GitOps flow. No, all right.
No.
But anyway, it's a technique for using Git to be able to define the versions of your software, and then have the platform actually pull that in and deploy it, rather than pushing it from a CI/CD sort of pipeline. And depending on how you implement that, there are different tools that so you can buy some SaaS products that will help you implement that. You can roll your own. You can build certain parts yourself, use different parts of the ecosystem. And again, this kind of talks to the point of, you've got different pieces and different clients will be using different things, but you can demonstrate the art of the possible by visualizing it. And in this case, it was just standard sort of normal flow diagrams and stuff like that.
Cool, wonderful, thank you. I don't know if anyone else has got any more questions, or would like to rest their eyes from looking at a Zoom screen.
We can collect the last maybe one or two if anyone has anything to add. It was really good. It was an amazing talk, actually. As Jason said earlier, yeah, normally you wouldn't really think of an association within design thinking and platform engineering. And it's really, really good that you put all your effort in looking at the users, empathizing, and also what I was quite surprised and quite happily surprised is the employee-centric approach that you actually have in your company. And I think from now on, this will need to be, and it will be more present, because I think when you do design for your employees as well, then the final products or services that you are actually putting out are enhanced, are better, and your user in the main will benefit more than just having the user as a sort of user-centric approach. So yeah, it was really good. So any more questions? No, I think we really thank you very much for your time. Thank you for everyone to come along, and as we said, we are going to post our next couple of events. So please keep an eye at the emails that we will send out, and join us for the next two. For sure, there will be in Zoom, and then we'll see what will happen from September onward.